Greetings, adventurers, and welcome to Skill Tree, where we learn how to do just about everything. Now, I have made it no secret that I am a big ol' nerd. And one of the things I nerd out over the most are the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, The Silmarillion are all books I've probably read about a baker's dozen each at this point in time. In fact, I even use the audio versions to help me get to sleep at night. Like, I just have them on in the background all the time. So when I saw that Amazon was releasing the Rings of Power, I got really excited. Now, before you start furiously typing in the comment section, I know all the little controversies and the toxicity surrounding this show. But honestly, taking it as an adaptation, I'm genuinely enjoying it. It's been cool just to visit a world that I love so much, even if it is an adaptation of it. Speaking of the world, my favorite part of the show so far actually hasn't been like all the story and the visual effects, all that's cool. For me, it's been this transition effect where it shows going to different places using the map. You've got this whole map of Arda that they jump around to show like where the scene you're watching is taking place, and I love the map they use. I'm a sucker for old maps and stuff anyways, especially like fantasy maps. And this one is, it's beautiful. It's a really nice map. And since I am who I am, if I see something I like, I make it. I make it for myself. So that's what we're attempting to do today. Today we're gonna try to make the Rings of Power map of Middle-earth out of leather. Now before we start, if you're new to leather crafting and you want to give this a shot, but you're not sure what some of the terms I use or some of the techniques I use, check out this playlist here where I cover a lot more of the basics. All right, without much further ado, let's jump right in and level up this skill. Real quick, credit where credit is due, one of the inspirations for this idea was actually this map that I saw when I was at Pensick. Also, if you haven't seen our Pensick video, the link to that is right up here. Now that map was of the Third Age, and it's the one we're probably most used to because it takes place like during The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. That's all in the Third Age. The map I'm using though is this one that Amazon released as a teaser. The fact that Beleriand is gone and Numenor is still there means we're firmly like in the middle to end of the Second Age. So for starters, I needed to figure out how I was gonna get this big old map onto my leather. The first idea I came up with was to split the image up and print them all out in separate pictures. Then just trim around the edges and tape them together. This was A, a lot of extra work, and B, it really kind of lacked the details. My printer just isn't good enough to get the real fine like village names and whatnot. So I looked it up and it turns out that at Staples for only $15, you can get one of these bad boys made. This is at a much higher resolution on very nice paper and all one piece, so the work's just done for me. That being said, because we're gonna put that on top of moist leather, that paper is quickly gonna turn to mush. In order to get around this, I actually had some of this contact paper left over from other projects. This is stuff you use to put on kitchen shelves and whatnot to protect it from water. And since protection from water is exactly what we need, it's perfect. Now I found that hitting this with a hairdryer first a little bit helps it to lay down nice and flat. Then I just removed the backing to it and carefully placed my map onto the sticky side. And then once it was in position, I just evened everything out and made sure there was no air bubbles or folds. With all the excess sticky stuff cut away, Robert, your father's brother, I had a nice laminated background to work with. Now the leather for this project, I didn't want it to be too thin because getting the details in there would really deform it a lot, but I also didn't want it to be like this thick honking map. So I ended up getting this 4-ounce veg tan that I got from Tandy Leather. Tandy Leather, your purveyor of fine leather goods and supplies. Now to space this thing out, I tried not only to conserve as much leather as possible, but to also use all of the leather's natural features to my advantage. Leather's gonna naturally have like marbling or a little rougher areas, so by lining that up with where rougher areas would be, say mountainous areas or desert areas, I can kinda let the leather do some of that work for me. With my positioning all figured out, I cut my leather, leaving around 1 inch on every edge. And this is another tip that the good people at Tandy Leather gave me. Tandy Leather. Expert advice, an affordable price. So because it's such a thin piece and there might be a lot of tooling done around the edges or whatever, if you cut it out exactly to size, it's going to deform. As you're tooling the leather, you're moving that leather aside. So your edges that were once straight are gonna go all over the place. So you're better off leaving yourself an edge so you can make up for that. Not only that, but by leaving that edge, it gives me a space to lay tape down. This is gonna help keep everything into position. Since it's such a detailed piece, I'm actually gonna have to re-wet the leather often. And if I don't have a way to keep that map exactly where it was before, it's gonna go all over the place. My lines are never gonna match up, and like, you know, the Anduin is gonna be over in the sea. It's not gonna work. So with that tape in place, I can now just fold back that map whenever I need to re-wet my leather. Also notice when I'm wetting my leather that I leave those edges dry. This is for the same reason, so I can add just little pieces of tape and stop it from moving left to right at all. Okay, so to actually put all my detail onto the leather, I can't just use a stylus like I usually use, just because there is so much detail. I'm gonna lose track of what I've already done and what I've missed. So instead, I decided to use a pen. Doing this leaves a clear mark on where I've already covered, and because I have that plastic backing, I'm not worried about the ink breaking through to the leather. So I really took my time with this project to try to get every single detail into place. But one of the things about this coastline is it's not a single line. In fact, I had to draw this same coastline 3 times. It's hard to make out on the paper map, but it does have kind of a retracing of that coastline a bunch of times, which I guess on a real map just kind of shows the change in depth as you get closer to the shore. So if you have a ship coming in, you know kind of how deep it is. On my map though, it's not necessary. I just think it looks awesome. It just has that kind of vibe. And when that's done, I was already excited about how cool this already looked on the leather. It's just the bones of a map right now, but I'm honestly already nerding out a bit over it. Anywho, after re-wetting my leather, it was time to go back in and start marking off all of my text areas. I wanted to make sure I locked in that really cool font, so tracing everything not only helped me put it all in the right places, but also helped maintain that overall style. And again, every step of this process where I got to stop and look at this map begin to flesh out really egged me on to go further. This was 100% a passion project at this point. I was having so much fun, so all that like really arduous detail work was kind of a pleasure. Speaking of a lot of detail, it was at this point I went back in and started on all of the many rivers and mountains. Good Lord. There are so many mountains. Just when I thought I was almost done with mountains, found more mountains. That said, there's surprisingly little forest. I feel like whenever I picture kind of that world, I picture far more like forest and green everywhere. Just all mountains, all of them. For the woodlands that do exist though, I just drew the outlines because I have different plans for how to represent trees. To put a bow on this part of the project, I traced out that beautiful map rose in the corner, including all the little point details and the rays that extend out into the world. And look how dope this map already looks. I am over the moon with just how cool this thing is. In fact, I bet if we stopped right there and just added a resist to it and then had hit it with an antique, a lot of that detail would show through. It would look kind of faded, but it would look cool. Having that thought though, I realized my hubris with this project. Because all of those 3 coastlines and all of the mountains and all of the everything now has to be locked in somehow. Either cut in and then stamped, or I didn't know what. That was all I had. That's the extent of my leather knowledge for the most part. There was just a lot more road to travel at this part on this project, but you know what? I was here for it. I was honestly having a good time. In fact, it's at this point I decided to add my own little detail into this map. Because if you look here in this southern region, you'll notice that it's quite empty. Which, I mean, you've got a lot of this extra small detail here, but on the leather, it just kind of looked empty. So to fill up that space a little bit, I went to ye olde English to Tangwar translator and got the phrase, "the road behind, the world ahead," from the traveling song in the Elvish script. This I traced out in that big blank area to give a little bit more visual interest and my own personal touch. From here, I started the long process of tooling this bad boy. I started by cutting out that coastline. I found that using the very corner of my swivel knife was the only way to get all of the details I wanted with the zigs and zags of the coastline. This is definitely a project which I had to sharpen my knife every couple of minutes, because remember, I didn't just do 1 coastline. I did 3. While I was at it, I also used my swivel knife to cut in all of the rivers and lakes, as well as that beautiful compass rose. From here, I'll admit, I was super stuck on how to do all of like the lettering and the mountains and everything else I had to do in the body of the continent. I played with the idea of just straight up using like fine tipped markers to get them all in, honestly cutting them in and stamping them. Then I remembered this episode I did up here in which we learned how to use a wood burning kit on leather. So busting out my trusty wood burner and hoping for the best, I started in burning my leather. And this was a fantastic idea. The wood burner worked perfectly for getting in all this detail. Not only that, but I noticed that as it was burning, it was indenting the leather, which means that when I go to add the antiquing later, it should rest inside of those little indents, making them pop more. Sure, it still took forever and a day to make all of these mountains. Like, this is 1,000 times speed and it still is fairly slow. But it was pretty easy to do, and it also allowed me to go back in and add shading and other details that I wouldn't have been able to get clearly with just a beveler and a background tool. This helps make the mountains that surround what will one day be the lands of Mordor look every bit as epic as they should on a map. The burner also worked gangbusters for the text, allowing me to really easily lay down not only my big bold text, but also by turning down the heat, I could get that super small text and write every single small village and waterway that I can see on that map. Seriously, I was able to add every single detail that was on the map. It was great. I did notice though that after a while the tips of the burner would kind of stop working, and it turns out the leather just kind of gums it up. So by taking a little bit of sandpaper and rubbing it across the tip, it completely solved the problem. And look at this beautiful ass map! All of those mountains and location names, at this point it straight up looks like a map. I couldn't be any more happy with the job that burner did. Okay, now it's time to actually start tooling this thing with like conventional leather stamps and whatnot. So after wetting it down and making it pliable again, I use this here cedar stamp to start laying down all of the trees and forests. As you can see, this stamp is just round and has these little star kind of rays that come off of it, which is great because it gives every single little tree tiny details like a leafy appearance. I even went back in and pressed in little tree trunks to all the trees that were in the front rows. I'm gonna be real, there is a bunch of tiny little hidden details in this map. I am so here for it. I'm one of those people who can look at a map for hours and just zone in on the little tiny things. I love it so much. Now for the coastline, I did want it to be like separated from the sea, and normally we'd use something like a beveler stamp for that. But I didn't want to muddy up those other lines that I took the time to draw out and cut out. So to get around that, I just ended up using the rounded end of my stylus to push in that coastline. And this worked really well, giving it a defined and detailed shape. I also used that same end of the stylus to push all the larger riverways down, which gave it this great effect and honestly made them look like the mighty rivers that they're supposed to be. In fact, the only feature that I did properly bevel was the compass rose, and I am so glad I did. It brought out all the little details and became one of my favorite parts of the end result. Now with most of my tooling done, I used a square to find where I wanted the edges of my map to be and trace them into place with a stylus, before going back in with a straight edge and cutting them out with a razor. So I didn't want the map to just kind of end at the edge of the leather, right? It would seem kind of unfinished to me. I wanted it to frame out and have a really kind of clean look. So to make that happen, I just used my wing divider to give me one line about 1 1/8 away and another line about 1/8 away from the edge. Then I just cut in those lines with my swivel knife. I also took this opportunity to bevel my edge with the aptly named edge beveler, and then bevel my cuts with the bevel stamp. So a lot of beveling going on, but trust me, it makes it look good. All right, so to jazz that whole kind of border section up, I first decided to use these little filigree and leaf stamps, just to give me some extra corner detail. These in particular just had kind of a cool elvish feeling to me. Next, I used this little half moon shader to go all around the border that I had created. This honestly didn't take all that long to do, and the finished result was really beautiful. It left this kind of scalloped design that from farther away looked a bit like rope, but close up had a whole bunch of really nice little detail. All right, cool. So now I'm on kind of untread ground for me. On most of my leather projects, I've used like a single bold color. If I was using multiple colors, it was usually just kind of around a hard border, or I was adding it on after the fact with a different piece of leather. For this one though, I really wanted to duplicate this kind of blue. This light with like kind of the patchy white coming through that makes it almost look like a clouded areas are there. I just thought that would look really pretty with the leather colors. And I had no idea how to do it. winging it. What I came up with was to use this dye reducer here to reduce down a bit of turquoise. I just added the blue in with an eyedropper until I got the concentration that I thought would look good. Now there's an order of operation to this thing, because I don't want any of that blue to bleed onto my land masses at all. But at the same time, I want to finish off the whole thing with like a nice antique so that everything would pop out, and I don't want that to muddy up my waters too much. So the first thing I did to get my detail into place was to go in with a paintbrush and paint in all of the landlocked waterways like lakes and rivers. It kind of scared me at first because the color was so light that the wet leather color took it over and it just looked muddy brown. But as it dried, I was so pleased with how perfect this color came out. And again, because I didn't want to get any of that ocean color onto my land, I went through with the paintbrush and meticulously painted in all around the coastline to give myself a little bit of a border so that I didn't get too close with my dye while I was doing the rest of the ocean. In fact, I did this with every piece that needed protecting, including that map rose. While I was there, I also painted in some of the rose points with a darker version of this blue, and then also with a lightened version of red to give me this nice pop of color. Once everything that I needed protected was all traced out in blue, I decided to give myself a little extra protection by using a resist over everything that I didn't want blue. This was a bit of a gamble because I knew I wanted the leather darker than it currently was. I didn't want to just use the natural leather color, but everything that I tried in little samples was too dark and ended up kind of making all of the details really muddy and disappear. I just put it on hoping that my antique would darken it up enough. That said, once I applied it, I really liked how much the resist ended up darkening up that leather. If it just stopped there, I was already happy with the color. It had that kind of wet leather look, which is just the right shade. It was perfect. With everything I needed protected covered in my resist, I finally went in with my blue and started laying down the ocean. This freaked me out at first because it just kind of looked nasty and blotchy. But as it dried, it evened out and gave me the exact look I was going for. I did have one freak out moment though, and I think it caught my inhalation of breath with my shock on camera. So, as I got kind of closer to the lands, especially around Numenor's always trouble, let me tell you what. I decided to use a paintbrush just to get the blue in as close to that shoreline as I could. I thought all of my paintbrushes were clean and I had thrown away previously used paintbrushes. Hard no! Look at this! Everything was so perfect! Now I have a dot! Stupid dot! Oh my god, did that drive me crazy. This was the first project I'd ever done where like nothing went wrong. Everything, I took my time, I was so careful. Oh god, that broke my heart. Anyways, once my ocean was in place, I went back over the entire map with another coat of resist to lock in that color and protect it all. Now comes the magic. I love adding antique to things. It just immediately makes it look cool. And this medium brown antique did not disappoint. I immediately love the color it turned the lighter parts of my map, just enough to give it a little bit of age and antique it and make it look really cool, but also make all of those details pop. Not only that, but by adding it to the ocean area as well, it really made everything a cohesive piece and helped blend it all together. Now, at this point, that little purple dot had to go. It was honestly killing me. This was a full bottle before that dot happened. Drink responsibly, kids. But to fix it, I came up with a pretty good idea, actually. I actually ended up making this little leather plaque here with my name written on it in Tangwar. It specifically says, Kit the Clever. But like, kind of like a title. I thought it was funny. But by sticking it on with some contact adhesive, it covered it up perfectly and just kind of made it look like the map maker's signature. Which it is. I am the map maker. It's my signature. Huzzah. But check this map out. Oh my god, it is everything I wanted it to be. Not only that, but me loving this world as much as I do, it was so much fun to really get to know this map this intimately. It made me feel like I was part of these stories that I was imagining as I was filling out these places that in my head I knew so well. This was just a fantastic experience for me. If you have some kind of fantasy realm that has a map that you enjoy, or honestly just like your local map or a part of the world that you really like, I highly recommend you do a project with your favorite medium and you make a map. It connects you to that world in a way that I honestly didn't go into it expecting. This was just kind of a cool thing I wanted to have, like an item to have. And now it is like way more than that. I don't know, I wasn't expecting it to be like an existential thing. It's a really fun project. I really do recommend it. Now, speaking of epic projects, it has been just forever since I highlighted some of your incredible projects. Check out all of these badass projects you skill monkeys have posted over on the Discord. At this point, I'm honestly just trying to keep up with how amazing all of your skills are. If you guys have any projects you'd like to share, definitely swing over to the Discord, link in the description below, and show us the things that you love to work on. Thank you all for watching. I really hope you liked this episode. If you did, why don't you give me some of that like it love and consider subscribing so you know when I release new content. In the meantime, though, keep leveling up, you. Thank you for staying to the end screen. The YouTube algorithm loves when you do, so it's a great way to support our channel. Another great way to support this channel is making a fellowship with these incredible people and joining our Patreon. And a special shout out to our newest high tier level Patreons, Wolfie, Stella Kinetics, Be Inspired with Dominic, Mike Coy, and Preston. I appreciate you all so much for giving to this channel and making sure we can continue to do this incredible stuff. Thank you so much. If you'd like to support what we do here, consider joining our Patreon, link in the description below. Otherwise, you can click on one of these videos over here that YouTube thinks you'd like. I'll drink and wait. Pick one.